Hi and welcome to my video. Today I wanted to do a review of the poetry collection And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. I've been feeling a little bit uninspired for videos lately because I don't know, I haven't read a huge amount this month and I'm still in the middle of reading some stuff, or towards the end of reading some stuff that I do want to review or talk about. But I did read at the start of January this collection, and at first I wasn't going to talk about it because I felt a bit, intimidated maybe, because Maya Angelou is such a prominent figure, such an important figure, especially in America, and I'm not an academic, I'm not a poetry academic, I'm not a literature student, I read for my own pleasure, so I feel like what I could say about it is very trivial probably and reductive and probably not as intense or meaningful maybe as someone else that has probably studied her or like has a deeper understanding of the things that she talks about. But I thought, screw it really, I'm going to talk about it anyway because I absolutely adore this collection. Maya Angelou means so much to me, which is crazy. I know she means a lot to everyone, but she just means so much to me, and I just had to talk about it. So this collection is actually two of her poetry collections in one. So the first collection is And Still I Rise, which was published in 1978, and the second is Shaker, Why Don't You Sing, and that was published in 1983. So they've been put together into this one collection that I have now. I'm not sure when this was originally published, let me just check. So it was originally published in 1986, but this edition is 2009. So maybe I should talk about my history with Maya Angelou. So I first kind of stumbled across her, maybe very late for someone, but when I was in my early teens, and you know when you're through your teen angsty phase and you're looking up quotes that express how you feel because no one understands you, and I just stumbled across one of her poems online, and the poem I stumbled across was Still I Rise, and I was blown away. It was the first poem that I'd read that I felt truly connected to. It was, and the first poem that made me feel heard. A lot of my experiences, I barely even acknowledged myself in terms of just feeling disempowered in terms of my race and my physical appearance, and just as a woman, I don't know, as a young woman that's trying to understand herself and her identity as a teenager in a very white area that I grew up in. And it was messy, but then I found this poem and suddenly it was just like I'd been heard. And Still I Rise is such a famous poem, but it took my breath away. I felt like someone had both hugged me and also sort of prodded my heart and it was just a weird combination, and it just meant so much to me. And from there I started looking at more of her poems, and then obviously eventually I got this collection. So this was actually a reread for me. I didn't say that. This is a reread for me, and I just fell in love with her work. And she even, Still I Rise, that poem in particular, even inspired my first ever tattoo that I got when I was 18. And future tattoos I still have planned for, based on some of her work. It's just, it's weird. She just really got into my life, and I've never really talked about it before. And I thought, why not this month? Why not reread one of her poems? I've been rereading quite a few things actually this month. So I was like, why not reread her poetry collection? Because I love it and I know it means a lot to me. I was actually a little bit hesitant before rereading this because I was worried that maybe reading it now I would actually be disappointed, or maybe it wouldn't mean as much to me or something, or I'd find out that maybe it's not as good as I thought it was. And I was a bit hesitant because I didn't want to lose that magic that I felt originally. And so I read it and I shouldn't have been worried. It's still amazing, and it's a 5-star, and it has to be one of my favourite collections. And that's not saying much because I haven't read a huge number of poetry collections, but I just absolutely adore it. It's just, it just gets me. I just wanted to talk a little bit about her and about her poetry and why it means a lot to me. And like I said before, this isn't going to be a super accurate, intense analysis. It's just my interpretation of stuff or my feelings about stuff. So one of the reasons why her work is important to me is because it feels like she writes in a way that is both incredibly personal to her. You can feel like this is her experience, or she's feeling these things, but she writes in a way that just becomes super relevant to me, at least. I feel like even in the poems where I'm not necessarily connected emotionally to what's happening, or I haven't necessarily experienced exactly what's going on, I still feel things, and I still get it, and I still feel impacted by it. And I think that is like masterful, to write a poem that's clearly so personal and important to you, and for it to mean something to everyone that reads it is just insane. How do you do that? I just think she's amazing. So my favourite poems are like, I have like the standard favourites, which are like Still I Rise, Phenomenal Woman, Caged Bird, you know, everyone loves those poems. But rereading this collection, there was like others that started to stand out to me, not necessarily like all-time favourites, but ones that started to mean stuff. For example, on my page 48, I think, the poem Bump to Bump, and this stuck with me. It just, like, at first I didn't even, I annotated it. I don't know if I can show you, annotated it, but at first I didn't like tab it. So my like system for tabbing this collection was my favourite poems I like tabbed at the top of the pages, let's say up here. My all-time favourite, which is Still I Rise, is in like a darker blue, but poems that I liked but weren't necessarily my favourites got tabbed at the end of their poem, if that makes sense. For example, so like Still I Rise got tabbed at the start, and Bump to Bump got tabbed at the end of the poem. So it's a weird system, but it's just what I did. And I didn't originally tab it at all. I just sort of annotated it and moved on, but it kept like coming up. It just kept popping up. And I just thought like, I'm gonna have to tab it. And that's actually made me think I need to talk about this collection, because clearly it's still with me. I read it a couple of weeks ago now. Where are we, in January? Is it a couple of weeks? I don't know, it feels like it's been January forever. But I read it recently and it's just stayed with me. And I think this is a classic example of a poem that's you can find so many analyses of it online. You can find so much things about it online, and people talking about it, dissecting it. And what was interesting is I did look at that stuff, but I found that even though that stuff, makes sense, you can dissect it and accurately depict what's actually happening in it, but also I found that I had my own personal interpretations. For example, I'll read the first stanza, which is very short, of Bump to Bump. It says, "Play me a game like blind man's dance, and bind my eyes with ignorance. Bump to bump, bump to bump." And that's the first stanza. So obviously it's talking about ignorance and people being blind to prejudice and things like that. And what I looked up online was people saying that the bump to bump is more like because people are blinding themselves, they're bumping into things, into her, and not really seeing her, not really seeing the issue, the prejudice, whatever, discrimination, etc. When I first read it, I interpreted it, the bump to bump bit, as like a heartbeat, like, you know, like that sort of rhythm. And that's a rhythm that sort of goes through it, even though when I read it, it probably didn't have that. That's the rhythm that sort of goes through it. Because I interpreted it as when I face ignorance or discrimination or something that's acutely uncomfortable, your heart does beat, and I become at least aware of my heart beating harder. And when I'm upset or hurt, it's just there. And that's how I interpreted it, and that's how I read it. And I just thought, like, this poem that's talking quite universally or generally about discrimination actually can have significant impact on you, and I felt like it relayed my own personal experiences of ignorance really well. And also, it's not a poem that paints the black people, or in this case a black woman, as wholly innocent, you know, holier than thou, you know, above all ignorance or anything. It actually like sort of critiques the fact that she doesn't do anything either. She's also blind. She doesn't do anything about it. She doesn't say anything. She stays silent. She's described as telling lesser lies, you know. So I just think that's just like, oh, so meaty. See that? That's my poetry analysis, meaty. But yeah, it just means so much to me. And even like I said before, the poems that don't necessarily, you know, I didn't necessarily immediately connect to or relate to, still I felt impacted by. For example, on page 11 of my copy, there is the poem Men, and this poem, it's talking about a young girl who grows into a woman and basically experiences her first sexual desires, but also her first encounters with men. And basically, I'm not going to say more because I think you should read it, but it's intense and uncomfortable is probably a better word to say. And this poem, even though it's uses quite specific imagery, I still I could feel it. I could feel like it has tension, and the tension in this poem as I was reading it was like building and building and building, and then at the end there's just like this just stop. There's like this the last word of the poem is maybe, maybe, and it just stops, and it's just like whew. Basically every poem in this collection I feel stuff. Obviously there's some that I like more than others and some that I'm just kind of meh about, but they all succeed in making me feel stuff, and that's why this collection means so much to me. And I want to read everything she's ever done, and for me I think it is rare to find something that you just gets you, really gets you, and that you get it and you feel connected to. I think more often than not you read a poem and you think, oh, that's really good, and like, oh, it's inspiring, or oh, I feel emotional, but to feel really got is like a talent, and Maya Angelou has that talent and I absolutely adore her. And yeah, I just wanted to share that with you and yeah, and it's just inspiring. This is why I love poetry. But I'm going to end the video there because I don't have anything more productive or useful to say. So thank you for watching. I hope you have very happy reading times, and I'll see you around.